particular authority by the federal Constitution. All right. Let me break that down in sort of non-legalese. It's basically saying the checks and balances for doing district maps, for making election determinations, things like that, apply at the state level as well. Nobody in this case was arguing. Some of the liberal talking heads have come out there and say, this is the biggest decision ever. Democracy was saved by this. No. The federal Constitution and its application to what states do to make election laws was already, everybody agreed that was still applicable. The question was, are state executive actions and state court decisions relevant on these type of cases? And the Supreme Court just said yes. So basically, the thing we already thought was the case, in most instances, the court said is indeed the case. Why is this significant? Because it means that state legislators in state, this has been advanced by Republicans who want to, at least in theory, use state legislatures to invalidate election results. That's the like extreme case, right? And to say, well, we'll send an alternative slate of electors that we think reflect how the election should have gone. Well, now somebody can challenge that in state court and say, well, the state constitution doesn't allow you to unilaterally do that, and those challenges would be viable. So I get it. It's not a big, sexy case. Got a column coming out over in the Tennessean about it. It is important. It is not going to make or break our democracy. The big one, I mean, and we're talking big because this decision, the case itself was, the opinion itself was 270 something pages. And that includes the dissents and things like that. Students for Fair Admissions Incorporated versus the president and fellows of Harvard College. Harvard. The Supreme Court basically said race-based college admissions policies are unconstitutional, ending affirmative action in higher education. Here's what they did not say. They did not say that schools could not use other criteria that may impact racially cohesive communities in the same way. You can take socioeconomic factors. A college could say, we want a significant portion of our student body to come from families that make less than X. Income is not a protected class. So they can still do that. We want students that come from schools that may have been disadvantaged. Again, the school you attend is not a protected class. In fact, there are a wide range of criteria in terms of actual life experience and things like that that are still completely on the table. I got a little teed off coming in because I was listening to Van Jones tell everybody how this was horrible, terrible, unfair, and explaining that, I mean, he was basically saying the Supreme Court's not legitimate, but he had no specificity as to why it wasn't legitimate. He said something about Mitch McConnell and Obama, but he said it was very strategic. He said the Federalist Society was very involved. He never said that this was unlawful or that the processes and procedures were not followed. He didn't say that. But I've heard him and a lot of the talking heads. In fact, on this specific case, on CNN, I heard more talking heads reading from and talking about the dissents than talking about the majority opinion. And this, to me, is a huge disconnect. And when I say huge disconnect, here's what I mean. Pew Research, that does a lot of different polling, very credible organization on a lot of this polling stuff. They've surveyed affirmative action, and when you look at its favorability, fewer than 33% of respondents approve of colleges considering race and ethnicity to increase diversity at the schools. what's happening is the media class, the pundit class from the left, acts as the opposite. That it's a 70% position, that the majority of Americans believe that race quotas, race structures should absolutely be used in higher education admissions. That's just not the case. That is, and I don't have a better way of saying it. And you guys who know me know that I'm not given to hyperbole. I'm not one of these outrage jockeys. But this struck me significantly, that this was a huge disconnect. For example, Gavin Newsom saying that these folks want to whitewash history, whitewash America. He tweeted that out. Okay, Gavin. Proposition 16 in California to reinstate affirmative action in higher education, because it's been against the law since 1996 in California, failed 57% of California's voters, not exactly the conservative class, rejected Gavin Newsom's Prop 16 in 2020. So again, this is not, the outrage here is amongst a very select elite class who thinks they know better and isn't actually paying attention to what people want or what's important. And yet they have such a big megaphone, it makes it sound like, hey, this is a close call, and it's just not. And we'll go over some of the other aspects of what the court said and how the court broke down this decision. We've got to take a break right now. I'm Cameron Smith. I'm filling in for Matt Murphy on The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
If you plan on traveling this weekend, pack your patience along with your belongings. And another death reported at the Nashville airport. That's coming up at 12:30. I'm Jay Harper on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Welcome back, folks. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy. Y'all have to make sure that y'all listen to Matt this afternoon when he fills in for Brian, because I know he misses you guys when I get to take the reins over his show and mess with him, because I know he loves you guys. I love you guys, and talk to him. Get on that show and say, hey, Matt, I'm driving in the car, going on my way home. How you doing? You can talk to me on the Super Talk text line, 615-737-9986. We are doing a Supreme Court Super Show. I have nerded out on these opinions. I have pulled the relevant excerpts. And I'm telling you, folks, as somebody who is a talking head, the talking heads on cable news have just not read a lot of these cases. They have not done the work to say, oh, well, the Supreme Court did actually address standing in this case. They did do these other, I have feelings. And I get it. I like feelings. I like the feeling of this shirt I got. I got a new one from Sam's Club, because it's where I do a lot of my fashion between Costco and Sam's. And
it's a great choice. It's affordable.
Yeah.
Looks good.
This one is, the only word I can use to describe this shirt is boingy. You can hear it on the mic. That is from me pulling my shirt and letting it go. It's like made of elastic, and it's some kind of recycled fiber something. But all I know is when it had me at breathable.
There's that, and then is it comfortable?
Oh, yeah.
That's the winner there.
This is amazing. And so, it's that time of year. I like the nice breathable things. And so,
yeah, when I look at the temperature and it says 98 outside, I want something that's a little breathable, for sure.
Yeah, the folks, a lot of y'all have asked, well, you're in and out. You do columns for the Tennessean. You write over there, USA Today Network. What do you do for a day job? I work over at Thanks in Franklin. And, it's business to business gratitude. Basically, it's this wild concept that if you should express appreciation for people, they want to do more business with you. It's a great, cool company, but the folks over there that I work with, they're like, are you going fishing today? I mean, y'all ask me that every day. Why? Because I wear fishing shirts with the vent in the back. You know what I'm talking about. Those like performance fishing gear, Columbia, like all that kind of stuff, right? And I wear Hawaiian shirts. So they're just like, why are you the way you are? And I'm like, because I wake up early enough that my wife doesn't catch me on the way out of the house. So I've mentioned this to you. It's very exciting. I will say on the Super Talk text line, because I solicited garden porn. I mean, I want to see your squash. I want to see your tomatoes, various other fruits and vegetables you were growing. Somebody asked me, this is 4458, said, do you eat squash blossoms? And the answer is I would. I just don't know. And this caller said, batter with eggs, a little flour, a little bit of sugar, and deep fry them. But you got to take the stamen out of, the part in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. So now I've got something to try. I actually have a lot of squash. We have a compost bin that it's a funny little thing. But I got squash blossoms and pumpkin blossoms all over the place. So I'm going to try it. Check it out.
Go for it, yeah. Let me know how it is.
Yeah, it seems like a weird thing. It also seems like I'd have to have a lot of those to fill up.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. That more of like a side dish, like
yes,
maybe like kind of like hush puppies on the side of like a piece of fish or something like that.
It's kind of like, it sounds to me like a Pinky Rays type food.
Like, absolutely.
Well, have you tried the squash blossoms? I mean, okay, but I'm going to do it. I think that's a great idea. Okay, getting back in to the Supreme Court stuff. We've got a break here in a couple minutes, so I don't want to get too into it. But I'll tell you that in this case, Students for Fair Admission versus President and Fellows of Harvard, the court got it right. And if you look at the facts, and I can go over these pretty quickly, race is a determinative tip, or was, in the Harvard's admission process for a significant percentage of all admitted African American and Hispanic applicants. At UNC, which was sort of the other school that was in this case, underrepresented minority students were more likely to score highly on personal ratings than their white and Asian American peers, but were more likely to be rated lower by UNC readers. These are the people that check out the applications on their academic program, academic performance, and extracurricular activities. The right to public education, we know this from Brown versus Board of Education, must be, quote, must be made available to all on equal terms. And so no state has any authority under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to use race as a factor in affording educational opportunities to its citizens. It's a big deal. This is the exact mindset that we've kind of fudged with and played with for decades in affirmative action. The courts basically said, we're not comfortable with it. We don't like it. It needs to have limited duration. And colleges have basically said, well, no, we're just going to do it indefinitely. And that was the case here in these arguments. The court repeatedly said, hey, they have no idea when this program will end or when they will achieve the objectives that they're claiming because they were all amorphous. It was sort of high-minded rhetoric with no clear metrics to measure it. We got to take a break. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Good afternoon. It is 12:31. Happy Friday. I'm Jay Harper with your top stories. Haze and hot. We're looking at 93 degrees currently, along with the intense heat, the potential for more storms today. We'll get to that weather forecast. Just hang on. The July 4th travel window is wide open. And if you're leaving today for the July 4th holiday via the highway, you're probably going to want to wait until after 6 o'clock. AAA says the middle of the day is going to be the busiest window for travel. Also today, predicted to be the busiest travel day in the air since before the pandemic. Also, as a heads up, we've been seeing traffic backups at the Nashville airport exits today onto the interstate. So plan accordingly if you are headed to BNA today. Here in Nashville, a 64-year-old person was found deceased at the airport early this morning. That marks the second passing at the airport in under a week. According to the Metro Nashville Police Department dispatch log, the death was reported at about 6 o'clock this morning. No further details are available just yet. This is the second reported death at BNA this week after a 30-year-old Kentucky man took his own life on Sunday. That is the latest news. Weather's on the way. I'm Jay Harper, WTN News.
Welcome back. I think we need to get some patriotic bumpers for the 4th of July. That seems reasonable. Appreciate you guys very much joining the show. I've appreciated the feedback on the Super Talk text line with your veggie comments. I've got Larry in Sparta. Before we get back into the Supreme Court stuff, we're gonna go on this Supreme Court Super Show. We're gonna go back and forth so that you guys don't fall asleep. I understand that Supreme Court case stuff, it's important. It can be really dry. So we're gonna try to kind of chew through it, talk about it, and talk about some fun stuff too. Larry from Sparta, Squash Blossoms. What you got, Larry?
Well, first of all, I'm from New York. I'm an Italian.
Okay.
And in this season, squash blossoms are done the way you said, but they also have onion and blue cheese, and they're mixed with eggs.
Ooh.
That's a breakfast. It's not a raised pinky thing. That's a breakfast meal.
That sounds excellent.
Yeah, that sounds like a killer combo right there.
Wow.
It
I gotta
is.
look that up. Now, did you make these or did you have them or where did you encounter these?
I've had them. My aunt was probably the best cook in the world. That's the only way I can say it.
Well, that sounds
I cook and
awesome.
everything, but yes.
Well,
My two aunts lived in the same house, and they used to always do cooking.
man, that sounds good. Larry, thank you for the call. I really, really appreciate it. I'm like I said, maybe it's not raised pinky. I'll try it. It seems like leaves, kind of, like I like salad. I'm not anti-salad, but I like a lot of the leaves that form a salad. If you just give me a couple, and so squash blossom, I know on a given squash plant how many blossoms there are.
Yeah.
So it's not a lot. So we're going to do it. We're going to see it. We're going to figure it out. Getting back into the Supreme Court stuff. We're talking about the affirmative action case, Students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus President and Fellows of Harvard College. Bottom line is that the Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution says that, hey, when the government starts using the classifications of, or what we call protected classes, then they have to overcome what's called strict scrutiny. Y'all have heard this on probably the news and other things, but it's basically like, we're going to strike down this law unless you can show a compelling government purpose that's narrowly tailored. And this case failed to do that. The plaintiffs the respondents in this case that were Harvard and UNC, they said a lot of flowery things that were well-intentioned. But the court has long stated that general societal discrimination and wanting to remedy that don't overcome the Constitution's protections when it comes to race. It just doesn't. And so what happened here was really, really important because this had been sort of, I don't know, languishing is the word, but affirmative action. There are a lot of states like California that had just banned it, went ahead and said, nope, we're not going to do that. Other states said, okay, it's here. Different schools had said, well, it's sort of a plus up. It's some factor. So the Supreme Court said, in a case called Grutter, all race-conscious admissions programs must have a termination point. They must have reasonable duration limits. They must be limited in time. They must have sunset provisions. They got to have a logical endpoint. Because their deviation from the quote-unquote norm of equal treatment must be temporary. The whole point was, okay, we're going to allow this to continue under these limited parameters for a little while. Well, if you turned on CNN this morning, you would have heard, well, we are not there yet. Do you not know that we still have racism in society and therefore we must have these programs? No one is arguing that we do not have racism in American society, that there aren't racists. We see it. You can go on Twitter and see it. that still exists, but the question is not does racism still exist? It's what are the legally permissible bounds of how you respond to that, right? And some of the justices, like Justice Brown, basically say, because of the history of racism that we know of in the United States, and it's clear, folks trying to act like our country doesn't have an ugly racist past are not being serious. She's right about that, but her position is basically, then you can have race-based preferences significantly later in time to remedy that. You don't have to like that position for it to be a coherent one. What she's saying is racism caused harms specifically to Black Americans, and that it should be constitutionally permissible to give race-based advantages to those people to remedy past harms. Again, you don't have to agree with the position. That is a coherent argument. The Supreme Court, the majority of the Supreme Court rejected that. And they said that they're pointing out this idea that if we become a quota-ridden society where every identifiable minority is assigned proportional representation in every desirable walk of life, it makes it weird. And think about it, and I'll take some weird cases that I've kind of pulled out of thin air, but it's something worth considering. Let's take the NBA. Imagine that you had to have we'll take the easy one because of this case, racial proportionality. The NBA is a business. Go in there and say, hey, this is impermissible racial discrimination that you do not have proportionality along that's connected with the American ethnicities. If you say, well, the NBA is private, so okay, how about a college team for a public institution? And if it's, well, we have to have representation, and it has to be proportional to overall population. You get some really weird results really quickly. And so I think we have to be careful in that type of analysis. It was interesting to me because in all of these cases, the court goes overboard. And this is all the stuff that'll put you to sleep when you read it. But it goes overboard in the detail and talking about what each of these programs did. For example, the universities that were in this case measured the racial composition of their classes using the following categories: Asian, Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, Hispanic, white, African American, and Native American. Well, the court pointed out, okay, so you're telling me those are the only 6 racial demographics of relevance. What about different populations within the grouping of Asian or Hispanic or frankly any of them? You're using this benchmark to say this scoop of this race conceived this way means this thing and brings this to the table. And the court said, no, you can't do that because this creates a system where you're inherently biasing the outcome in admissions based on simply just saying we've made, and I'll say it, racist assumptions, and this is what it should look like because we are elite. We are in a position to determine what the proper composition is and what each of these buckets brings to the table and necessarily means. The implicit assumption there is that everyone in the bucket of Native American brings the same thing to the table. That's just not true. We know that's not true. That's racial stereotyping. And it results in some weird things. And Harvard and UNC were saying, oh, this isn't a negative. This is not negative towards anybody. This is a plus up. This is just a good thing. So we evaluate all the applications, and then we say, hey, we'll just give a little bump here to folks of certain racial demographics. The First Circuit that heard this case found that Harvard's consideration of race has led to an 11.1% decrease in the number of Asian Americans admitted to Harvard. Sounds like a negative to me. And when I was listening to some of the talking heads explain why this is good or bad, they were saying, well, the Supreme Court has pit one racial minority against another. No, they didn't. Harvard did that. Harvard did. And it's a zero-sum game. The court says that. It said there are only so many admission slots. So if you give one group, for whatever reason, it could be race, it doesn't matter, an advantage that you don't give to the other groups, you are basically skewing the deck. You can say it's a good for them, but it means it's a negative for the other groups. Apparently, folks that over at Harvard don't understand that. They don't understand the concept of zero sum in a finite pool of admissions. Now, if Harvard is going to say, you know what, we don't actually care about our admission pool anymore, we're going to open up all these additional slots, fine, but they're not going to do that. And so the arguments didn't hold water before the court. And I think what we're looking at here is the court just basically saying, hey, the time's up here. We're not saying there's no racism, that racism is done in America and all of that stuff. But we are saying that in this context, in this way, this is no longer a permissible consideration. We'll finish up on this particular case when we come back, and then we'll get to some of the others. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. I've been teaching investing on Nashville airwaves for over 20 years with the Investor Coaching Show. And in that time, I taught a lot about how markets work and how we invest money and academic principles of investing money. But I've also talked an awful lot about how to avoid the mistakes that people often make with their money. Think about it. A lot of people sold out of the market at the worst time when COVID struck, or when TARP happened, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or gold, they invested in that at the worst time. Bailing out of the market because they were worried about Y2K or 9/11, or jumping into energy stocks, or jumping into cryptocurrency. One of the things that I like to do is educate investors, because I believe that the more educated you are, the more confident you are, and the more confident you are, the more successful you can be as an investor. Now, I not only do that on our radio show, but we do that in our offices around the Nashville region, 10 offices. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call. Or you can call 615-851-1950.
The U.S. Supreme Court continues to be busy. And if you plan on driving to a July 4 destination, you're going to have quite a bit of company. Those stories at 1 o'clock. I'm Jay Harper on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Oh, we're rocking out, y'all. We've been rocking out to the Supreme Court for almost an hour now, and we're going to wrap up this case on affirmative action in higher education. A couple things I wanted to hit. First, I've got red international tractors on the Super Talk text line. I've got squash, peppers. I mean, y'all are great. I love seeing what y'all are growing. Growing things is fun. It is something you should try. I understand some people kill everything, but you got to, get a little practice. Don't give up. Just keep going.
I have the opposite of a green thumb for sure.
The black thumb of death.
Yes.
It's a thing. I've had several friends that are like that, but don't give up. Enjoy it. So a couple last things. The majority in the case that we've been talking about, obviously this was a passionate disagreement between folks at the Supreme Court, between the justices. And they addressed the dissent. And here's a quote from the opinion that is just ice cold. This is good. While the dissent would certainly not permit university programs that discriminated against Black and Latino applicants, it is perfectly willing to let the programs here continue. In its view, this court is supposed to tell state actors when they have picked the right races to benefit. Separate but equal is inherently unequal, said Brown. That's Brown v. Board of Education. It depends, says the dissent. And I think that's at the heart of this case. That some of the justices said, well, we like these sort of racial quotas, restrictions, tip-ups, whatever you want to call it, but not others. And so these are good, but others might not be good. If it's a program that benefits, for example, white students, of course the Supreme Court would say, well, no, you can't do that. But when it is Black students, they say, oh, okay, that's fine. And I understand the history here. I'm not unmindful of that. But the question is, should you allow racial discrimination in college admissions or not? And just because you mean well doesn't change things. And the court found that out and said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. I'm excited. We're going to have a good show. We've got several more cases. It is shocking. There have been some busy clerks at the Supreme Court. We're going to go over some of those other cases, what it means for religious liberty, what it means for student education loan repayment. A lot has happened over the last several days, and I'm here so you don't have to read it. I'm Cameron Smith. I'm filling in for Matt Murphy on The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Good afternoon. It is 1 p.m. I'm Jay Harper with your top stories. Rather hazy and hot and bound to get hotter, but we are at 94 degrees currently. Along with the intense heat, we may see a rogue shower or storm this afternoon. We'll get that forecast to you here in just a bit. As Cameron has been discussing the Supreme Court with a number of decisions this morning, they struck down President Biden's student loan forgiveness program. The 6-3 decision mirrored the voting pattern of today's LGBTQ case and yesterday's affirmative action case along conservative and liberal lines. ABC's chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, tells us the ideological skewing of the justices will be used to propel voters to the polls next year.
We don't know exactly what the president plans to announce later today. We're waiting to see. What we do know, according to a source inside the White House, is that he is going to blame Republicans for this. He is going to use this as an opportunity to make the case to voters that this is another example of why elections have consequences, why they matter, and why he feels that they need to make sure to get out and vote next November.
If you notice your workplace or office looking a bit empty today, that's because this is expected to be the busiest travel day in years as Americans head out for the long 4th of July weekend. ABC's Alex Stone says when you drive will impact how much traffic that you're stuck in.
43 million Americans will be driving to a getaway this weekend, according to AAA, and that means traffic. The experts who study traffic patterns say your best bet to avoid traffic today will be leaving after 6 tonight or getting on the road tomorrow before noon. And already, for example, in the Southwest, people who drive between Las Vegas and L.A. have been told that 4-hour drive will be 6 hours or more on the 5th of July as everybody heads out of Las Vegas and back to L.A.
That is the latest news. That hot weather forecast is next. I'm Jay Harper, WTN News.
Are you excited yet? When you come from the Matt Murphy show, you should be entertained. And I'm here to do that. I'm Cameron Smith filling in for Matt. Matt's going to be in this afternoon, and I can already tell he misses you. He's going to wander in here at some point, and he's going to say, my regulars, my people, I miss them. He's filling in for Brian. You should listen to him, talk to him. Norm from Cookeville has some thoughts on the Supreme Court. Norm, you're on the air.
Hey, I wanted to say that affirmative action, it has hurt the people that it planned on helping more over the years. Now, I understand it was needed in the 50s. I'm 65 years old. In the 50s and 60s, maybe. But, Morgan Freeman said that if we stop talking about race, then it'll go away. And I have worked, of course, since I was, 16 years old. I've been a machinist. I've worked in the public. I've been a sheriff's deputy for years. And I have seen where people who have less ability, if you will, were put in places of ability because they had the race or the gender that would fit into the desired context. If you just look at what happened down in Florida during the 80s, and they had a bunch of Cubans coming in, so they hired a bunch of Cubans through affirmative action, and at one point they had a shootout between these police officers who turned out to be corrupt because they had infiltrated the police department and the DEA. I don't know if you remember that happening. But affirmative action has hurt more than it has helped. It was needed, I believe, during the 50s and 60s. But as we started to get more integrated as the years went on, I believe that the Supreme Court, this was needed to say, it's time. It's time we did away with this. It's time that we step out and say, look, it doesn't matter what color you are. I have worked with some tremendous people of color who I have unbelievable respect for, and I also have worked with some who I didn't respect at all because they didn't deserve the job because they should be in the jail, not working at the jail, and they were put in the place simply because of affirmative action. It's time to get rid of that, and if we get rid of that, maybe we can get rid of this whole division that we have between whites and blacks and Asians and Mexicans. Maybe we can get rid of that and say, look, if you can do the job, let's just do the job.
Yep. Thanks, Norm. I appreciate the call. And I think the Supreme Court basically agrees with you in the sense that they said it's time that those suspicious race-based policies, it's time to go. And I understand, look, reasonable minds can disagree on this. Obviously, and I get it that there are some justices on the Supreme Court that don't share my perspectives on a lot of things. They're very talented, intelligent people who see things quite differently. That's the reason the Supreme Court matters so much, is they're basically setting the sidebars to the sandbox for public policy. They're saying they are determining the constitutional bounds, and they are referees. That is their job, is to say, hey, here's what the Constitution says. Here's what this law or policy does, and is this within the bounds? And that does matter. It matters very much. And a couple of you have chimed in and said, well, we got to thank Trump for this. And I think you do. I think you got to be honest and say the judges that he picked, there's two other folks, one of which I know is going to make your ears burn to say you got to thank. But the Federalist Society. I was the president of the Federalist Society at Alabama Law. I was involved. There was a very specific strategic plan to say, you know what we learned from the activist courts of the 60s and 70s was they matter deeply. And so you need to have a presence in law schools. You need to have a presence in the federal judiciary. You need to be very thoughtful about the kind of judges that you're nominating and putting on the bench. And the Federalist Society has had tremendous clout. It used to be just the American Bar Association. They would say whether a judge was qualified, sort of thumbs up or thumbs down. I worked on Senate Judiciary. I saw their reports. And ABA still does good work. But you've got the Federalist Society saying, hey, we're developing pipeline for folks that have a more traditional view of the Constitution. That it's the job of judges to say what the law is, what the constitutional bounds are, and that they're not supposed to substitute their policy preferences in. And everybody says that the other folks' court is activist. What I mean by activist is when the court writes law. That's when I start to get a little edgy. It's like, come on, you can say this law is unconstitutional and send it back. You can strike down a program. It's when you decide you're going to create. And we saw some of this with the Roe Court with Planned Parenthood v. Casey, some of that, it's, well, we find these things are permissible along this developmental schedule and these things, and they kind of created. That's what I mean by an activist court. What people mean now by an activist court in Talking Head universe is the court that does the things I don't like is activist. That's not a very good definition. I will say, just as a personal anecdote, this was when I was in law school. My wife worked in admissions, and I started looking around at some of the University of Alabama's policies. And I was on law review, was going to write a note, and long story short, for those of you who are not lawyers, is when you're on law review, you basically submit what amounts to like a legal article. And that was one of the things that I had to do. And so I'm looking around, and I'm like, well, you know what's funny is the law review, which is, you know, some of your better performing students, things like that. It looks really white. What's going on here? Because the student body at Alabama Law wasn't. And so I started digging in and looking at it because I knew all the information because Alabama's a good law school and they taught me well. I knew this was publicly available, that I could request it under sunshine laws and they'd have to give it to me. And my theory was what was happening was that because of the programs at schools like Harvard, so back up a little bit, with law schools, there, you know, rankings, and y'all have all heard about that stuff. But everybody's got their admission bands, and they say, well, here's what your grades need to be. Here's what your LSAT score needs to be to get into this law school, right? Well, by definition, you only have so many students of different racial demographics that are applying to all law schools, right? So if Harvard says X percent of our student body for Harvard Law must be these racial demographics, well, they immediately swallow up the students, the minority student candidates that have the highest performing test scores and grades. That's what happens. They get to grab those. And then you kind of go down the rankings, right? Well, by definition, there's only so many students that fit those bands, and there's only so many students that are racial minorities. So what had happened is a situation where there were students that, at least this was my thesis, were not set up for success because when the top tier minority student candidates based on academic performance were swallowed up by, say, the top 5 schools, then everyone else, to create a racially diverse student body, had to keep pulling from students whose academic performance was below their bands. And that was the argument that I was going to make. And the dean of the law school, who was a dear friend of mine, was like, you know, you may have a case there. You may be able to prove this in your article in the law review, but don't. And we had that conversation. It was very transparent. And I said, okay. And I, at the time when I was a student, stood down, and now I can see why. Like in the Supreme Court case, when you look at it and see what's actually going on, these ideas of proportionality, all of the well-intentioned things also create some circumstances where folks aren't set up for success. Because if your peer group, remove race from the discussion, if your peer group of students has a higher academic capacity and performance track record, and then you're put in that environment. Now, to be clear, some students are exceptional and they've had a different track record, and for different reasons they didn't, and then maybe they do extremely well because they work their tails off. Good for them, and I support that. But most students, race blind, when you put them in with students that are performing at a higher level, it's a challenge. And so that's what some of these things, these policies create, even though they're well-intentioned. And I do think we need to be honest that diversity is really important in an academic setting, but it's intellectual diversity. It's diversity of life experience. And the Supreme Court did not stop people from stop institutions from those type of criteria. It's, oh, well, there's different life experiences that come here. Okay, cool. That's still allowed. You just can't use race as a proxy for these things. And I saw this in my own home with a son who was African American. And he associated a lot of negative things with blackness and a lot of positive things with whiteness. Our culture does that and perpetuates this harmful stereotype because it's not true. It's perhaps one of the greatest lies in our whole culture that the color of one's skin dictates your outcomes and options. Does it matter? You bet. Has it mattered throughout history? Yes. Are there other realities, demographic identifiers that have mattered throughout history? Yes. Throughout all of human history. In fact, for most of human history, we've treated each other absolutely horribly. But we've got to be at the point where we say we can look at those things and see those things, but what it means, we cannot create racial stereotypes. We cannot say that all black people are X, all Asian people are Y, all white people are Z. That's a stereotype. It's harmful. It's dangerous. And the Supreme Court said it's impermissible under the Constitution. And I think that this is a great decision. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you, if you disagree with it, read it anyway. Read the dissents. Figure out in this wild world where everybody is just venting their spleens what you think about what's actually there. And you can go, I'll later today tweet out some of the cases so you can actually go read the cases. You can go to the Supreme Court's website. It's not hard. supremecourt.gov/opinions, and you can look at them. You can read them. And I understand it's legalese. All of these have what's called a syllabus at the beginning where you can read the summary. It's the cliff notes of the entire opinion. And so please do that. That is very helpful for the discussion. It's really, really useful. We've got a couple callers. I'll get to you on the other side of the break. I want to talk quickly about Groff v. DeJoy. I'll do this in literally 2 minutes. There's an employer basically has had to show that if there's somebody that's claiming a religious need or accommodation, in this case, it was a gentleman who said, hey, I'm not going to work on Sundays as a Christian. I'm an evangelical Christian. Sundays are not meant for labor. I'm not going to do that. So they put him in a rural place, and then this is for Amazon deliveries. And then they started doing it too. And then finally they kept disciplining him, and eventually he resigned. The Supreme Court said that no, an employer has to show that the burden of granting an accommodation for religious reasons would result in substantial increased cost in relation to the conduct at its particular business. So literally for every business, this case, it's getting no airtime. And this is a case that's going to potentially, in fact, every business right now within the reach of my voice and our entire country. Because if somebody comes to a business now and says, hey, I've got a religious accommodation request, and that business says, well, no, it wouldn't be fair to other employees to give you one. And the Supreme Court has addressed that specifically, said, no, you can't use employee animosity to a particular religion or other things like that to be considered undue. It's literally to the cost of your business. So if they ask you to do it and you say, no, I'd rather not, you got a challenge. And so this one, again, no airtime, major impactful decision to businesses throughout the United States. So we can talk about that one too on the other side of the break, but the Supreme Court is dropping so much right now that really, really matters to our country. And I'm glad you guys are along for the conversation. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.
GOP presidential candidate Ron DeSantis on the campaign trail in Philadelphia. We'll hear from the Florida governor. That and more coming up at 1:30. I'm Jay Harper on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
This is solid. This is very solid. Welcome back, folks. This is the Supreme Court Super Show you've been listening to because the Supreme Court decided to dump all of the opinions at the same time. It's hilarious watching, and I'm not immune from this, watching all of the commentariat try to figure out what do we talk about first. There's so much going on. There's so many important decisions. You got to pay attention, folks. This stuff absolutely matters. We'll talk about in the last hour the political realities of this. It's a big deal that the Supreme Court is basically upending a lot of things that have been around for a long time. And then folks say, well, precedent. Well, let me tell you something about precedent. It's there, but the Supreme Court is designed to be a long-serving body. Lifetime appointments there. And so as the court changes its mind, people say precedent as if the Supreme Court should be bound by all past decisions. Literally nobody with a brain actually wants that. Otherwise, we'd be bound by some horrific decisions. Separate but equal would be the law because the Supreme Court gets it wrong sometimes. And they can get it wrong for a long time. And then they change their mind. So this idea of precedent is just like a fancy way of saying, I don't like the opinion. And that's happened. I want to get to some phone calls right now. We've got a few minutes heading into the mid-hour break. So we'll do the phone calls and then we'll talk some more cases. Brett from Huntsville, what you got?
Hey, Mr. Smith. Yes, sir. We're not ready for this colorblind society that the Supreme Court thinks we are.
Okay.
And case being, this is if we want to do this where nobody checks the box going into college.
Okay.
I don't want the jurors on a jury to know if you're black, white, your race, your gender, anything. You just go into court as a number. And then and see how the sentencing ends up being in court for everybody. I mean, if that would be the case, Joe Biden's son, Hunter, would be in jail right now. But because
so I think you're onto something. I would be completely supportive of taking defendants and saying, you're there, and if you don't want to testify in your case, then you can stay away from the jury, and they can't consider factors about your appearance.
Well, I don't want them to know you're black, white, anything. You're just a number.
Sure.
And we'll see if the sentencing is the same the way it has been in the past, and the way there's a much larger black population in prison than white. It's not proportionate. We ain't been worried about this for a while. But I mean, it's like they're 4 times as many in the ratio of the makeup we're talking about.
So what's the right ratio?
Okay. Well, it's not about ratio. It's if you break the law, you go and you get sentenced according to the law instead of your color of your skin.
Agree.
Because that happens today. It
Sure.
happens. It's been happening in this country for a long time. We still judge people on their color of their hair, the way their hair is cut. They're transgender. They're lesbian. We can't get past the simple things. So we're not ready for what the Supreme Court did, and that's where the left.
So you would support having race as a criteria in college admissions?
No. We just struck that down by the Supreme Court. Now let's play it on the other side. When you apply for a job, I don't want them to know if you're black, white, male, female. You just apply for the job, and they have your number, and then they hire you because you're the best qualified for the job. And then you go to work. and you can't be fired because they don't like you when you get there. Let's play that game. Let's do it the right way.
All right, thanks, Brett. Appreciate the call. I think that's going to be a little tough for interviews when you walk in there and you want them race blind. I don't see that as being particularly effective. I'm going to get to Larry real quick, but Larry, we only got like a minute, so let's get to the point. Larry, you're on there.
Hello.
Hey, Larry, what you got? You got to go fast.
Hey. Okay, Cameron. Well, I was intrigued by your caller. It's interesting what he had to say.
Sure.
We really have a long way to go. But my point that I wanted to make today was we need to all come together. DeSantis, Trump, all conservative Americans need to come together, and we need to start a new party, the American Patriot Party, who are concerned only about our country and our well-being. We need to put aside all this political nonsense. We have a lot of work to do. And one of the generals said it would take 12 years to get America back where it should be. And I know he's right.
Okay.
We're going to have to work together to do this. So, let's quit bickering and fighting amongst ourselves. Let's put America first. Let's get us going again.
Sure, Larry. I appreciate the call, and I get it. A lot of people have that opinion, but we're also free, and free people, they don't get along a lot. That's just the reality. Even where they might agree on 90% of the stuff, there's a lot that they don't. What Mason and I agree on is we got to take a break. I'm Cameron Smith. This is the Matt Murphy Show, and you're listening to Super Talk 99.7.
Good afternoon. It is 1:31, and I'm Jay Harper. I've got your top stories. One of the big stories, it's hot and it's hazy. We're at 95 degrees, along with the stifling heat. A rogue shower or storm also possible. We'll get to that weather forecast here in a bit. Florida governor and 2024 Republican presidential candidate Ron DeSantis on the campaign trail as he addresses the Moms for Liberty conservative group in Philadelphia. Among other things, DeSantis touts his efforts in Florida to ban discussions of race and sexual identity in elementary school classrooms.
We have prohibited puberty blockers and operations on gender for minors. It's mutilation. It's wrong, and it has no place in our society.
The fairly new group was met by protesters in Philadelphia. The July 4 travel window wide open. If you're leaving today for the holiday via the highway, you're probably going to want to wait till after 6 o'clock. The period right now is forecast as the busiest window for travel. Today also predicted to be the busiest travel day in the air since before the pandemic. I've been looking at the traffic maps, and we're seeing some backups in various parts of the city already, especially at the Nashville airport exits. So if you are planning to head to the airport, keep that in mind. You're probably going to sit there for a bit. I should also point out there's an overturned vehicle in the left lanes blocked on I-40 westbound at exit 192. That's over in the Bellevue area. That is the latest news. Weather's on the way. I'm Jay Harper, WTN News.
Mason's got the boss.
Thought I'd make our day a little more patriotic.
I think we got to at least get to the part where we say born in the USA.
Oh, easily, yeah. Just one verse. Hold on. Here we go.
It's a very interesting and appropriate song for the discussion if you look at the lyrics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot there. It's not blindly patriotic. The hook's pretty good, though. Being born in the USA, myself, I'm favorably disposed to the country. And as you celebrate our independence this coming weekend and week, enjoy yourself. Be safe. Don't blow up your fingers. I know there's a tendency. I have many redneck relatives, and I myself am half redneck. Depends on the day. Sometimes 3/4 to 80, 90%. It can get wild.
Depends on who you're talking to, how much the accent comes out.
I have had bottle rocket wars.
I've done the exact same thing.
My brother had a scar on his chest where he was shot with a Roman candle. Now, who shot him? We won't get into that. But
my brother has a similar scar, except for he shot himself by accident.
And y'all are going to love this. And this says so much about where I come from and my people. But my mom and dad's rule was you have to wear eye protection. I'm like, now as an adult with sons of my own, I realize how insane that was.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It's like, well, just wear eye protection. We're shooting explosives at each other.
Be a little safe, but you don't have to go like full on like bomb suit or anything like that.
Yeah, so this is, and I will tell you as a father of young boys, increasingly they're not even that young. I've got a 14-year-old now. You have to have some unsafety. I know that's a wild proposition. No, you don't need to have bottle rocket wars. I get that. But, going out by yourself in a kayak on the lake, like, it's a little dicey sometimes, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And that sort of controlled danger is critical to development.
Yeah, giving the kids a chance to explore a little bit is always nice. I enjoyed it growing up. I ran through the creek all the time, picking up, messing with fish, picking up crawdads, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that crawdad may pinch the daylights out of you.
Absolutely.
But you're fine. And I think so much of what we do today is padded room parenting, padded room culture that's like, no, nobody can experience any hardship. Hardships are all bad. No, hardships make you. Let me repeat. Hardships make you. I love days when I get to sit on the beach and, just chill. But I don't get better because of those days. I don't become a better husband, father, Tennessean. I don't, right? If I tell you about all of my beliefs and all my faith and what the Bible says, but then I don't experience things and then you see that lived out in my life, doesn't matter, right? Nobody cares what you do when things are easy. Everybody cares what kind of person you are when things are difficult. Ron from Hillsborough clearly has a similar set of parents. Ron, tell me about those bottle rockets.
Yes, years ago, we had a little bottle rocket war. We was throwing them at each other. Well, we had about 4 or 5 people show up. So we had another about a month later, about 10 or 15 showed up. And I took a pipe and I'd stick a dozen in it and use a torch. And I could shoot 12 at a time. Well, the next one we had about 20 people there. Everybody had pipes, and I had a pipe that had 3 barrels on it. So then the next one we had, everybody had 3 and 4 barrel guns. I went to my shop and took a garden tiller and put a squirrel cage fan on it, put 16 barrels on it with 2 torches I could flip on, and I could shoot 360 bottle rockets at one time. Somebody got it on video somewhere, but
that's the moral of the story. Can you shoot? What's a gross? 144, right?
I think so. Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. So you can sit more than 2 gross of bottle rockets at the same time.
Yes.
That you were a man among boys. Thank you, Ron, for that. I mean, that's life, right? Like you need to get into potato guns, man. Like come up with creative ways to do stuff. I will forever, it is etched into my mind when my roommate and dear friend in college, he said, shoot me with the potato gun. And we were like, and obviously the answer is no to that. So we, instead of it just being no, which was the right answer, we said, well, why don't we fill a sock with flour?
Because that's totally softer.
Yeah. We were like, this potato is really hard. It'll like break your ribs or something. And he's like, no, just like shoot me with it. And I said, we can't do that, but we could fill a sock with flour and jam it in there, and it would probably hurt less. It didn't.
Absolutely not. I mean, have you held a packet of flour? The thing is packed tight.
Thankfully, he didn't break any ribs, but man, he had a bruise. It was dinner plate size purple. I'm like, I hope you don't have much internal bleeding. And
much?
Yeah. I've gotten somewhat smarter over the years. The Supreme Court is much smarter, much more capable, and has issued more opinions than I could possibly imagine. I went over Groff v. I say this wrong every time. Groff v. DeGioia, which is the one you're not hearing about, which is the postal worker who asked for a religious accommodation to not work on Sundays because he was a Christian, and ultimately had to resign because they kept disciplining him for it. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, you can't do that. If you have an accommodation request, you have to show, in order to not accommodate, you have to show that it would result in a substantial increased cost in relation to the conduct of your particular business. That's a game changer for businesses around the country. It just is, and we're not talking about it. So I'm letting you know, you might want to pay attention to that. Businesses out there that are listening to the sound of my voice, you may want to start reaching out to HR companies, your HR team, and be like, hey, so what does this mean? And what are the requests we're getting, and how are we responding? Because this could be a potential game changer there. I mean, it's unbelievable how many of these big cases there are. And we only have an hour and 15 minutes to get to the rest of them, but we're going to do it. The next one is Biden v. Nebraska. And no, this is not a war over corn. This is about the federal student loan stuff, okay? This started with the COVID-19 pandemic under the Trump administration, where they started to pause stuff. They paused stuff, the repayment, the interest, all that stuff, because they said, well, some of y'all can't work. It's a real hazard here. We're going to pause this. And then they kept pausing it. Y'all recall this. And ultimately, we ended up with, under the HEROES Act, which Biden claimed gave his Department of Education the ability to cancel $430 billion worth of student loan principal. And the court said, and I quote, it does not. That was the crux of their holding. And the HEROES Act allows the secretary to waive or modify existing statutory or regulatory provisions applicable to financial assistance programs under the Education Act, not to rewrite that statute from the ground up. We got some highly educated listeners out there, and one of the text line folks mentioned Chevron deference and saying so essentially what we're talking about there is it's jurisprudence based on the level of deference that should be given to federal agencies. Well, here in this case, while not directly dealing with sort of the regulatory side of things and what level of deference should be given to agencies promulgating regulation, we've got the court saying, if you don't have statutory authority, we're going to stop you. And this is a big deal. It's a big deal because of what's called standing. And standing basically means there's a case in controversy, and I want to explain this in simple terms. There's basically a legal dispute that the court has to resolve. If there's no legal dispute and you're not a party to it, typically the court's like, butt out. In this case, the court said that Missouri had standing through MOHELA, which is the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority. And that because the Biden administration canceled the student loan debt, they would not be entitled to something that I think was like $40 million in fees, and that would harm the state of Missouri. And they argue these things back and forth, but ultimately the Supreme Court said, yeah, I mean, this is a situation where the executive branch has outstripped its congressional authority. There's no general standing, like somebody who's a citizen can't just make that claim. So somebody had to have standing, and the Supreme Court said MOHELA, and by extension, the state of Missouri did. And I think this is really interesting for that reason, that ultimately the Supreme Court, there are these questions when the president does something, there's no ability to just reach in and say, you can't do that. You don't have statutory authority to do that. And so there's what I call a standing hole, that it's really hard for people to challenge the constitutionality or frankly, the legislative authority given to the executive branch to do something if they can't demonstrate how they were negatively impacted. This one was a creative way to do that. I think we'll see more of that. And I think when the executive branch overreaches its legislative authority, when it acts unilaterally, and it won't be just Biden, it'll be whoever the next Republican president is too, there will be more entities that the court will find have standing to bring that, hey, you didn't have authority to do this thing. And I think this is good. I think it's good for America, because on these major questions of does the executive branch have the authority to do that, I think these cases should be brought. I think the Supreme Court is perfectly situated to decide this. And the folks who don't like the outcome, and I understand why you wouldn't like it, because you didn't get your debt canceled. But the idea that the courts can't decide these major questions where there's a dispute of authority between the legislative branch and the executive branch, what do you think judicial review is for? It's to deal with those type of disputes. And so I like this. I think I would have probably been a little bit more giving on the standing front, but I think this case is really important. It will very much frustrate folks that they didn't get the goodies. But even this makes it easy. The case cites Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying people think that the president of the United States has the power for debt forgiveness. He does not. He can postpone, he can delay, but he does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. Nancy Pelosi said that in 2021. So this one, I think, was an easy call. I don't think it was a weird one. We've got a couple more cases. We'll talk about that, talk about some of the implications of that, talk about the fact that I still can't get over Joe Biden having a grandchild that he does not acknowledge as president of the United States. That drives me insane. So we'll talk about it. I'm Cameron Smith. I'm filling in for Matt Murphy on The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. I've been teaching investing on Nashville airwaves for over 20 years with the Investor Coaching Show. And in that time, I taught a lot about how markets work and how we invest money and academic principles of investing money. But I've also talked an awful lot about how to avoid the mistakes that people often make with their money. Think about it. A lot of people sold out of the market at the worst time when COVID struck, or when TARP happened, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or gold, they invested in that at the worst time. Bailing out of the market because they were worried about Y2K or 9/11, or jumping into energy stocks, or jumping into cryptocurrency. One of the things that I like to do is educate investors, because I believe that the more educated you are, the more confident you are, and the more confident you are, the more successful you can be as an investor. Now, I not only do that on our radio show, but we do that in our offices around the Nashville region, 10 offices. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call, or you can call 615-851-1950.
All right, for y'all that didn't like The Boss, this better? I mean, it feels very Bradish.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's Stars and Stripes forever.
Yeah.
I thought it fit.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's a little weird when I start to hear this music. I'm like, where should I duck? Who's got the Roman candle? Like,
where are the batons being thrown?
Yeah. I mean, I was coaching the Nolensville Panthers at our preseason camp for 10U. It's a big deal. And I realized they had already started shooting off fireworks yesterday. I'm like, or somebody was getting shot. There were only a couple of options.
Open for fireworks, for sure.
So I appreciate you guys on the Super Text line. We got a couple more cases to get through on this Super Talk Super Show. Supreme Court Super, a lot of words. Supreme Court Super Show. How about that? 615-737-9986. 615-737-9986. Text or call in. Let's get the comments rolling. We've got one more hour. It's going to be a ton of fun. And I mean a ton of fun. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on the Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
It is 2 o'clock. I'm Mac Morey with your top stories, hot and hazy and 96 degrees. And along with that excessive heat warning that's in effect for the whole mid-state until 8 p.m. tonight, we may also see a shower or storm later on this afternoon. Got a complete weather forecast coming up in about 5 minutes. The Supreme Court this morning striking down President Biden's student loan forgiveness program. The 6-3 decision mirrored the voting pattern of today's LGBTQ case and yesterday's affirmative action case along conservative and liberal lines. Mary Bruce tells us the ideological skewing of the justices will be used to propel voters to the polls in 2024.
We don't know exactly what the president plans to announce later today. We're waiting to see. What we do know, according to a source inside the White House, is that he is going to blame Republicans for this. He is going to use this as an opportunity to make the case to voters that this is another example of why elections have consequences, why they matter, and why he feels that they need to make sure to get out and vote next November.
And we got an update in the investigation into the OceanGate Titan submersible.
Took us about an hour and a half. And it's faster than we normally do. We talk about some of the changes that we made, and one of them was our descent rate. So we normally descend at 25 meters a minute. The team had us descending at 35 meters a minute.
That was Pelagic CEO Ed Casano. And over in Nashville, a 64-year-old person was found deceased at Nashville International Airport earlier this morning. According to the Metro Nashville Police Department dispatch log, the death was reported just after 6 a.m. and as a dead arrival on incident. No further details are available right now. This is the second reported death at BNA this week after a 30-year-old Kentucky man tragically took his own life on Sunday. And that is the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Mac Morey, WTN News.
Welcome back for the final hour of the Matt Murphy Show. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you for your comments and your thoughts, your text. It's been great. Thank you for the various pictures of squash, peppers, and green beans, tractors, corn. All of this is acceptable and welcome. You can send those pictures to 615-737-9986, 615-737-9986. You can reach out at DCameron Smith on Twitter. In my ongoing effort to have this conversation continue in the Elon Musk space, hashtag TN Politics. Just do it. Come on. It's the best. It's the best one. It's the easiest one. We can keep the conversation going. Do it over there. And I still chuckle a little bit when I look at the Supreme Court opinions list and the fact that I decided to read them. That is even weirder. So many opinions, so much important stuff. In the last hour, we finished up with, guess what? The president can't forgive student loans. Not going to happen. He just doesn't have that authority. The legislature has the authority. The Congress has the authority. He doesn't. The Supreme Court said that. It was very, very, very exciting. I have a Matt Murphy coming into the studio with his, I think it's a Western Hawaiian shirt style thing. It's exciting. The case I want to get to real quickly, and then Matt and I can do what Matt and I do best, which is make stuff up. The 303 Creative LLC versus Elenis. This is the analog. It's the website analog of the cake case. It says your speech cannot be compelled by state government. And this is the problem. This is the liberal road to hell. It is paved with good intentions. I'm not faulting liberals for saying we want a more accepting society. We want all these goodies. We want people to be better. We want people to accept one another, and all of the soaring rhetoric that they had in the affirmative action case is also here, which is our intentions are very good. But we use the very heavy hand of government to make those intentions a reality. And that's where the Supreme Court said no. No. And that's the case from the opinion. Laws along these lines have done much to secure civil rights of all Americans, but in this particular case, Colorado does not seek to ensure the sale of goods or services on equal terms. It seeks to use its law to compel an individual to create speech she does not believe. And this issue, the 10th Circuit observed this. The 10th Circuit, for a lot of the case, the Supreme Court agreed with them and said, if Ms. Smith offers wedding websites celebrating marriages she endorses, the state of Colorado intends to force her to create custom websites celebrating other marriages she does not. Van Jones got into a lot of hand-wringing this morning trying to say, oh, this is an affront to the equality agenda and all. And okay, but if she does not support those marriages, but you're telling her that she must, if she wants to do business, it strikes me as unfair. And the court agreed. It said you got to have the ability to speak freely. Otherwise, what does the First Amendment mean? And they gave several different examples. And I think this is a challenge that people miss all the time, is they decide, well, we want the good outcome and by any means necessary. And when you do that, you end up hurting yourself. You hurt others. You hurt the cause you're trying to advance, because you're saying you can't think, feel, and believe in a way that we do not condone. And that we, as a society, we just got to get over that. The notion of I get to decide what Matt Murphy or Brian Wilson or any of you listening actually believe, and then I can use the government to hammer you when you dissent. That to me is a huge problem. All right. Supreme Court Super Show. We've got through it. We got through it, Matt.
Oh, there'll be more to come at 3:00 this afternoon.
Woo!
I can assure you. Hello, Cameron.
Hi, Matt.
You feel like you're doing a good job today, do you, on my show?
I do, and I told them that you miss them so dearly when I get to fill in for you, you fill in for Brian. And while it's great to talk to Brian's folks,
I miss them.
These are your people. I told you guys. I told you he misses.
That's why I'm here. I'm actually heading over to Bold Patriot. I encourage everyone to head over to Bold Patriot from 3 until 7. We're doing the show over there today.
Yeah.
So that's nice. So had to sling by the radio station.
Do you have brewed beverages? Wow.
There are a variety of different types of beverages. They had like the frozen, like the slushy machine.
Mm-hmm.
For a while, Janet had the slushy machine, except it was like a wine slushy, which the ladies just go goo goo gaga over. So they've got things on tap for those non-beer type drinkers. But you're invited to come on and kick off the 4th of July weekend celebration with me, Super Talk 99.7 WTN. To reflect on what you're saying, it's fascinating that Joe Biden comes out earlier today. I love watching the liberal tears all day long.
So
how
delicious.
dare we ask for equality? They don't want equality anymore anyway. They want equity, which is a different thing. But to hear Joe Biden say, well, we believe in an America that believes in equality for all, unless you're Christian, unless you're Asian American, unless you're anyone that thinks moderately different than the liberal group thing.
There are certain protected classes that can be discriminated against.
Right. But other than that, no. If you're whitey, you should just, pack it in and go home. Well, obviously, someone creating she's not selling widgets.
Right.
And she's not saying, hey, I'm selling these widgets to everybody but Tennessee fans.
She has creative input.
There is a creative and artistic input, and as with the cake baker, the Supreme Court, and you add to that, and Jay St. Clair's going to talk about this, I'm certain, in the 3 o'clock hour today, because I'm going to have him on to discuss some of these cases. It's not as if you are being harmed when you are denied service for your gay ceremony by this particular website maker, because guess what? There are 1,000 other website makers that want your money and want your business. There are 1,000 other cake bakers, and the court considers that. What is the substantial harm to an individual based on this one person claiming religious exemption from having to do business with them?
Yeah, and this one is personally applicable to me.
Well, yeah, you got some website action going on.
Well, the big one is film. So in the case, they said this is akin to telling an Islamic filmmaker that he must make a Zionist film.
Right.
And so the idea that, with what we're doing with Savage Lands and stuff like that, and saying, hey, we want to make family-friendly stuff. We have a perspective and a worldview. For somebody to come to me and say, well, we want to make a film with you, and it must contain things that you expressly reject, well, my answer would just be no, right? And that would be concerning if somebody could force me to do that.
The other religious case is interesting to me in as much as it was unanimous. And I think it was unanimous based on the recognition by even the liberals on the court that if you are going to deny an individual a religious exception for their day of worship, you're doing that for all religious faiths, including some of those quote-unquote minority religious faiths, such as the Muslim faith in the United States of America and some others. I mean, and obviously a business can't be shut down as a result. I think they just kind of shifted the goalpost a little bit.
Yeah.
It was de minimis. It went from de minimis to, much substantially harm your business. And I love the fact that this guy won that case.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because you have to feel like this is a religious person, and he starts working at the post office. Well, I'll never have to work on Sunday. It's the post office, right? They're not open on Sunday. And then he goes, goes about his way, and then suddenly they're like, what? We're starting to deliver package on Sunday. Well, I'm not doing that.
No, but then they moved him to a rural post office. He's like, well, at least at this rural post office, I won't have to do it.
Sunday.
Then they started doing it there, and then they kept punishing him, and he's like, I'm out. I mean,
at some point, right?
And then this is the losers in all these Supreme Court opinions. The big losers are executive overreach.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big loser.
Loan forgiveness, sure.
It is.
Just pass a law, Joe. Just get a law passed.
Folks that want to use the heavy hand of government to get what they want to the exclusion of others, they had a rough run. And so for me, I'm like, look, this is great. This is great.
And I have several quotes that I'm going to bust out, and you may have seen some of these from 07, 08. And I'm going to give you some thoughts about affirmative action coming from the man. You know who the man is? Barack Obama. I mean, no, Barack Obama said he accepted the idea that and I think most of us would agree that based on the discrimination that existed for a good portion of the United States of America's history, that there needed to be a certain level of, dare I use the word, reparations, and affirmative action was a part of that in college admissions. But in order to get to that place that we all claim we want to be, you have to eventually say, now's the time. We have to put a stop to it eventually.
Yes.
Otherwise, you start discriminating. I mean, anybody that's read the synopsis of the court, you get it. I mean, you start discriminating against other minority groups like Asian Americans, as an example.
So I will say, again, because I'm a nerd, I read these things.
Oh, you're a nerd.
And not just the syllabus. I read the orders and opinions.
And by the way, this is a camp shirt. It's
a camp.
Hawaiian shirts, by definition, need to have flowers on them in some form or fashion.
You have horseshoes,
and
a horse.
This is what I would call a camp shirt, which is a fun, button down, short sleeve with, something fun or
what is that?
Engaging.
Is that Brokeback Mountain?
Yes, that is. Oh, damn it, I forgot his name. What's his name? Gyllenhaal, that guy?
Jake Gyllenhaal.
That's Gyllenhaal, and there's
Well, so I just got to say this. The last little piece of the Supreme Court Super Show, the best thing of all these is Justice Kagan in the student loan case, right? She brings up a hypothetical. This hypothetical belongs on The Office. I'll just read it to you without my comments. So imagine the horrific. A terrorist organization sets off a dirty bomb in Chicago.
Okay.
Beyond causing deaths, the incident leads millions of residents, including many with student loans, to flee the city to escape the radiation. They must find new housing, probably new jobs. And still, their student loan bills are coming due every month.
No, can I just speak to it? This is stupid for me to speak to it, but no, you know what would happen, Justice Kagan? Just like in COVID, we just experienced you could have used COVID as an example, except it would have proved you wrong, because in COVID, you guess what we did? The government passed a law temporarily suspending individuals from having to pay back their student loans because of hardships due to what? A national emergency.
Right.
What an idiot.
This is the plot for Escape from Chicago. No, and she writes this. To prevent widespread student loan delinquencies and defaults, the secretary wants to discharge $10,000 for the class of affected borrowers. We're Escapes from Chicago.
I've got some of this too because it's delicious. I mean, all this is so good. Ketanji Brown Jackson had to change the aspects and dynamics of one of these cases in order to argue against it in her dissent. I mean, Sotomayor did the same thing. She had to change the nature of the case, creating these types of hypotheticals in order to. It's amazing.
It's shocking insofar as some of the justices, in looking at the dissents, you can make some credible, rational arguments, but some of them are like, I just don't like it.
I don't like this. Well, I said yesterday, Cameron, on the affirmative action case, that we're in an amazing place right now where the political left is arguing not for equality but for vengeance.
Yes.
That's their argument. They're arguing that we need to extract revenge from people who took advantage of an unfair system 80 years ago.
And I hope you address this at Bold Patriot, but one of the things that is most shocking to me in all of this, turning on the talking heads and like listening to them, particularly on the affirmative action case, that affirmative action in higher education admissions is a 33% position. Like 33% of the country is like, yeah, sure, that's a good idea. The other 66% are like, nah.
That's no good.
That's a bad idea. Yet, if you turn on MSNBC, CNN, a lot of these, it's like, well, 66% of us think that this is the right policy, and the fringe thinks that it's not. But they're so loud that you get the impression that this is a close issue. It's not.
Well, and I heard you playing along, and I appreciate what you were doing with the caller. It was like, everything should be colorblind. Juries should be colorblind, and,
Sure.
interview. That's not the argument. The argument isn't that we don't recognize that this person is an African-American applying for a college acceptance. We're arguing that you should not use that as a determining criteria to exclude one person and include another one.
Right.
That's the argument. The argument isn't that we don't recognize that different people from different backgrounds grow up differently and have different challenges in their life, which is why Robert said, look, you can talk about your life experience.
Yes.
And if race is a part of your life experience, then you need to include it, and the schools can consider that. But they can't make it just a blanket determining factor, this guy out, that guy in, or girl.
Yeah. Well, and
I love this stuff.
We're going to get a call from Dan Manda saying that we didn't take the break at the right time. So we need to take the break right now.
Oh, no.
It's getting weird. It's like meta. It's totally meta right now.
Right, because Cameron's in charge, technically.
Yeah. Yeah, Matt's a
But it's
guest
my
on his
show.
own show.
Right.
So I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy, who I'm talking to on Super Talk 99.7.
Some landmark rulings today by the Supreme Court. A sheriff here in Benton County suing the mayor, and the holiday travel rush is on. Those stories and more coming up. 2:30 Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
We're back. I'm Cameron Smith. Matt Murphy was here, and then he ran away. That's how we roll here at Super Talk 99.7. You never know who's going to show up. I kind of like that.
It's a revolving door.
It's a very heavy door. Very heavy door.
Yeah.
I'm here in my Boingy shirt, If you don't know what that is, it's made from bits of panther. I don't know. It's I got it at Sam's Club, and it's delightful. It's when all the lights are on in here and it gets a little warm, I'm well equipped, and it's kind of like spandexy. So I put it on at the gym this morning, and it's great. We have the excessive heat warning remains in effect till 8 p.m. If you grew up in the South or have lived here for very long, the excessive heat runs for several months, and it is deeply uncomfortable. I recommend you hydrate, particularly if you're doing things. If you're just outside walking, you're just going to sweat and get all swampy. But particularly for your kids exercising, playing sports, doing stuff like that, make sure they got water, folks. I coach a lot of youth sports. I talk about a lot of youth sports because it is awesome. But that was one of the things old school folks maybe got a little bit wrong is you do need water. You do need to hydrate before, during, and after athletic competition because we do not want kids to have heat stroke, things like that. Dogs and cats and, maybe not as much the cats, but dogs specifically, make sure they have plenty of water outside. Cats, they'll kill somebody and drink their blood if they're dehydrated. So it's different with them. But it's all kidding aside, not a joke. Make sure that you take care of that. It's popping up. As Matt and I were talking about, losing Supreme Court cases stinks. It's not fun. Conservatives have done this for decades. And this is the thing that just blows my mind. Conservatives lose, and don't get me wrong, we whine plenty. With the Obamacare decision, when Justice Roberts came out with that one, oh man, you got it wrong, you didn't do it, blah, blah, blah. Harumph. We got all that. But this type of situation is new for our liberal brethren. They're used to the courts being their tool, their entity that does what they want, their legal theories, and now some of those are being turned on their heads. And I'll use an example of like disparate impact analysis. Basically, so think about this affirmative action case. The court's saying you can't use race in admissions. So somebody will say, well, we want our racial quota nevertheless, so let's use some other factors that get us to the same spot. Okay. So if Harvard does that in effort to essentially back end these racial quotas or percentages, then there's something called a disparate impact analysis that, for example, an Asian American applicant could file and say, you know what? You're still doing the exact same thing because it has practically the same effect, but you're just calling it something different. And so that's out there on the horizon. That's going to happen. And that's a big deal because the court did leave open the option for folks to consider different things. You can consider finances. You consider a lot of different dynamics that produce a more diverse student body. But race is not among them. And I think when you're looking at free speech was defended, now I get it. Some people may say, well, that woman that wouldn't make the website, well, she's just bigoted in her views. Okay, fine. Your First Amendment says you can say that. You can have your opinion, but the government can't compel her to create and speak in a way that she doesn't want to. I think that's a great protective point. We got to take another break. We'll wrap up this stuff, start talking about some other stuff when we come back. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on Super Talk 99.7.
30 minutes after the hour of 2 o'clock, I'm Mac Morey with your top stories. 95 degrees right now, and that excessive heat warning in effect until 8 o'clock tonight, so stay shaded and hydrated. Got a full weather forecast coming up in about 2 minutes. A landmark ruling by the Supreme Court this morning. The court has ruled in favor of a Christian wedding website designer who doesn't want to make sites for gay couples. Here's Lindsay Watts.
In a major setback for LGBTQ rights in America, the court's conservative majority has ruled a Colorado wedding website designer shouldn't have to create sites for gay couples. The court says wedding websites are a form of speech, and Colorado's anti-discrimination law can't force a designer to express something she doesn't wish to express. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, in her dissent, says this is the first time in history the court has granted a public business the right to refuse service to members of a protected class.
And the other big ruling to come down today was on student loan forgiveness. A 6-3 vote has put that program to an end today, and a decision later today expected on LGBTQ rights. Right now in Tennessee, Fox 17 reports that the sheriff of Benton County, Kenny Christopher, is suing Mayor Mark Ward due to his belief that the department has not received proper funding. The suit states that the sheriff has only been able to keep enough employees to cover around 3/4 of the area. The mayor's office alleges that the budget for the sheriff's department at the time was $4.2 million, including a pay raise for the sheriff's and jail employees. And the 4th of July holiday travel rush is on. Today is expected to be the busiest day, not just in the skies, but on the roads. The AAA estimates 43.2 million Americans will be hitting the road. That's up about 2.5% from last year, 4% from 2019. Trevor Alt is more from New York.
We do always like to mention the gas prices, $3.54 a gallon on average right now, down from $4.85 last year. So while you're sitting in your traffic jam, at least you can think about the perceived savings.
And here in Middle Tennessee, the average price for a gallon of gas is $3.17, according to Gas Buddy. That is the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Mac Morey, WTN News.
Welcome back. I'm Cameron Smith. Matt Murphy was here. He's no longer here. But this is his show still. And he will be at Bold Patriot Brewing on your drive. And it will be a good show. Matt, off the air, he told me how excited he was about, I think specifically was referencing liberals' ears and how delicious they were, and said winning feels good. And he's right. It does. And it just kind of grates on me that the response from the liberal elite class has been everything is broken, the credibility of the court is in question, all of the bad things, how do you not know America is dead? To which I would respond, you lost Supreme Court cases. Conservatives, Republicans have lost Supreme Court cases. How about the Affordable Care Act case? We talked about that over and over again, and sometimes you're just on the losing end of these things. What has emerged for me here is that, and I get it, I take a lot of this, it's weird being somebody who speaks and writes professionally and looking around and be like, so much of the commentary class is vacuous and loud. And particularly this elite notion. And I expect you guys to hold me accountable to this. You can tell me right now at 615-737-9986. That's 615-737-9986. The moment that you think you're hot stuff and you know what's better for other people, I'm here to have conversations. I want to make you think. But I'm not here to tell you what to think. And that's been the biggest mistake of the commentary class, is we've looked at everybody else from our high perches and microphones and said, well, let me espouse some wisdom to you, plebes. And that's wrong. We shouldn't ever do that. The privilege and responsibility of being able to talk to you guys on the radio, to speak into this microphone, you listen, and some of you call in and we have conversations, is something that I take seriously, Matt takes seriously, Dan takes seriously, Brian does. We can go down the list. Because we need to inform. We need to help you think through it, not tell you what to think. That's the job. That's why this exists, right? And what's happened is a lot of people who have that privilege of people listening to them don't get it. And they say, I just need to tell you about the perfect world and how it will be. And if you can just fall in line and parrot what I say, the world will be good. And it won't. That's the lie. And nowhere has it been more apparent for me than these last few decisions dropped and watching the left melt and basically say, we don't like it, so America is dead. It's not. Republicans, conservatives, Christians, other folks haven't liked other decisions, and America kept going on. And so I understand that we live in a culture where defeat is not acceptable, where losing, oh, we can't have that. We have to have something less offensive. No, we don't. The corollary here, and I'll use the Federalist Society as a great example. The Federalist Society was born from basically judicial activism that sort of got into creating new laws and things like that. And there had to be a strategic response. It wasn't, I'm going to whine about it. It was, I'm going to develop a plan to change a thing that I see as problematic. The decisions today are directly a result of that. And I'm not saying the Federalist Society could have done it by itself. It certainly couldn't have. But it was a tactical response to what was happening in the real world. Democrats and progressives are going to look at this and say, what should we do? How do we stop this from happening? Because we don't like the way this feels. That's something that we have to prepare for. That's something that we have to say, because we're always fighting for the future. We're always contending for who gets to shape the future. And so you'd better bet that this is going to be a political issue, that Democrats are going to use this, and they should, because this is America, and that's how the whole process works. And the moment that we forget that, the moment we say, well, we won and we got it, and so we're going to sit on our hands because everything's fine now. No, it's not. It's not. Republicans got some wins. Conservatives got some wins on these cases. Like, they liked the result. Democrats, progressives did not. But the invitation needs to be, no, we need to be more political. We need to engage in more political speech. We need to advance the viewpoints that we care about, because those of liberty, of freedom, of protecting the First Amendment, protecting individual merit, individual effort, I think are winners. And if Democrats want to campaign on, no, we will reduce you to a racial scoop of ice cream, I don't think it's a winner. I really don't. To say, we will use the state authority to tell you what you may express and how you may express it. The content of your speech. I think it's a loser. And so I think that that's where Republicans should challenge and contend and keep pressing here. Because it's not as if it's, well, we want to have more government control in a different direction. These decisions are a marked departure from that. And that's something I get really, really, really excited about. Like, this is fun to say, hey, we're advancing freedom. Because I know how the political class works. I don't care whether you vote Republican or vote Democrat. The political class loves to pass laws, to restrain things. It's what they do. So to have a court say, we're actually pro-freedom. We want you to express things. We don't want you to be reduced. We want the full breadth of your personality, of your experience to matter more than the color of your skin. We want your religion, your faith to matter too. And if an employer doesn't want to accommodate that, they should have to show how the cost is just outlandish to do it. These are all freedom-loving decisions. And that's something that we should get really, really excited about. We shouldn't mail it in at this point and be like, okay, we're done. And I think that the political question now, we need to thank, folks who like these decisions need to thank three parties specifically. Donald Trump, and those of y'all who know me well know that I call balls and strikes when it comes to Trump. So I'm not saying this because I'm a Trump acolyte. I'm saying this because he trusted the Federalist Society, that's the second party, enough to nominate judges who adhere to the rule of law and who say, hey, liberty and individual freedom plus responsibility, that really matters. And it has to matter under our Constitution. And the last person is Mitch McConnell. He held the Republicans together. He blocked Merrick Garland. He did that. And he took a beating for it. And you can tell me about, well, he's a rhino. Well, did you like the Supreme Court decisions? Did you like the way that turned out? You can have your rhino, not rhino, all the go on cable news and see who the hotheads are. It was Mitch McConnell that blocked Merrick Garland. He didn't fold like a cheap suit. Those nominees, it is hard to hold a Republican coalition together in the Senate to get justices confirmed. It is. Mitch McConnell did it. So you can tell me all the stuff you don't like and how you think he's so rough, but Donald Trump, the Federalist Society, Mitch McConnell changed the game. Just in this recent batch of decisions. And Some of them didn't come out the way that we thought, but I still think they're probably pretty close to accurate. I mean, the Voting Rights Act case that didn't go Alabama's way, that was a well-reasoned decision. You don't have to like the result, but we're getting the Supreme Court behaving like I think the Supreme Court should. It's not entirely predictable along ideological lines. We've seen that in opinion after opinion. So instead of just saying that this is not a legitimate court, this isn't the thing, let's be glad this is one of the ways that we decide things. We have a long-running body that's capable of withstanding political pressure and applying the Constitution to the laws of the land. That is great. And then we can have it out for the White House, have it out for Congress, do the political stuff for a lot of the day-to-day policies. I think America is not, our best days are not behind us. I think they can be in front of us. I am an optimist here. And I understand that there's a lot of things that aren't great, but it's working. The democracy is, our republic's holding together. And we should be really, really excited about that. We're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to finish this up. Y'all have been excellent, and I really, really, really appreciate it. I'm Cameron Smith, filling in for Matt Murphy on The Matt Murphy Show on Super Talk 99.7.
Hi, I'm Paul Winkler. I've been teaching investing on Nashville airwaves for over 20 years with the Investor Coaching Show. And in that time, I taught a lot about how markets work and how we invest money and academic principles of investing money. But I've also talked an awful lot about how to avoid the mistakes that people often make with their money. Think about it. A lot of people sold out of the market at the worst time when COVID struck, or when TARPAP and the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or gold, they invested in that at the worst time. Bailing out of the market because they were worried about Y2K or 9/11, or jumping into energy stocks, or jumping into cryptocurrency. One of the things that I like to do is educate investors, because I believe that the more educated you are, the more confident you are, and the more confident you are, the more successful you can be as an investor. Now, I not only do that on our radio show, but we do that in our offices around the Nashville region, 10 offices. To learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call. Or you can call 615-851-1950.
That excessive heat warning in effect until 8 o'clock tonight. 2 big Supreme Court rulings today. A bill passed by Governor Lee temporarily blocked, and the travel rush, it's on, folks. That and more coming up at 3 o'clock. I'm Mac Morey, right here on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Welcome back, folks. It's been fun. It's been real fun. And I hope you have fun over this 4th of July weekend. Be safe. Good decisions. Respect the heat.
Nah.
Respect it. Respect it. You know.
No, you're right. You're right.
I went to, we had practice scheduled. We were supposed to have the apocalyptic heat yesterday. It rained, and it was like 78 degrees, 80. It was glorious out there.
It was humid as all get out as soon as that rain ended, though.
Yes, my hair does the poof, where it's like poof.
There's a reason I'm keeping my hair shorter right now.
I am holding my hair down with these headphones. That's the only thing that's left. It's been fun going through the Supreme Court cases. I mean, there's a lot of detail. I know Matt's going to pick up and have that discussion ongoing. Don't let people tell you that this isn't legitimate. Don't let people try to tell you that, hey, this is just partisan or judicial activism. Okay, cry more, please. The tears are delicious because sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. When you lose, you have a choice on how you respond. And Democrats are not going to take this laying down. They're going to use this to bolster Joe Biden and say, look how important the Supreme Court is. Clarence Thomas is getting older. There may be an opportunity here. And you know who is older than Clarence Thomas? Joe Biden. And so that they're looking for anything that can animate this candidate, that can give any. Let's be honest. Joe Biden is just a proxy for not the Republican thing. No one is excited about this. But I'm telling you, what's coming is, well, it may not be Joe Biden's that exciting, but imagine Supreme Court. And if y'all will recall, that's what just pushed Trump was look at the stakes here. Look, you might have 1 or 2 Supreme Court picks, 3. Big, big game changer. And so you can't blame Democrats for saying, you know what? I think we'll try that. We will try to put some life into the candidate that is Joe Biden by making this a referendum on Supreme Court. How fun would it be to replace Clarence Thomas with a Ruth Bader Ginsburg clone? Like, that would be great. That's what they're thinking. I promise you. I've seen it. I've seen it on the interwebs. They are thinking, how do we change this? Because Republicans and conservatives took a blueprint from them and said, the courts matter a lot. They set the guardrails for all the other policy decisions. And you know what happened? Conservatives won. And now they're mad. Well, they don't have to be too mad. It's July 4th. It's a good weekend. We don't have to talk about these opinions indefinitely, but I appreciate you spending the time with me, going through this stuff, and maybe learning a little. And I'm not going to tell you what to like, think, feel. I am going to tell you, this is Super Talk 99.7, and I'm Cameron Smith. Thanks for listening.